Hello, everybody, and welcome to this podcast episode for the Home Performance Advocate podcast. In this series on manufactured housing, we are moving from some of those mental concepts of communication and importance, and we're going to be looking at something physical directly on the units themselves. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about skirting. And this is one of the things you'll notice right away as you look at a manufactured home as something different than a site built home. Because a site built home is not typically going to have skirting around the crawl space area, and a manufactured home is. And you'll notice usually right away it can tend to be a problem. And so we'll go over some types, some things we've noticed, some different problems with those. And then at the end, we'll look at some of our recommended practices, things we've tried and things we're still trying, and things that we've decided work pretty well to improve the efficiency, the durability, and of course the health and safety of these units. So with me I have Parker and Chance, and just to start off, let's go ahead and say, what are some of the common types of skirting that we run into, and then what are some of the common problems that we see with those types of skirting?
Yeah, absolutely. So three main types is usually what we see. The vast majority of the skirting on the manufactured homes that we work on are the vinyl vented skirting. Next up, in terms of most common, would be like an OSB rigid material as the skirting. And then the least common, but we have seen it every once in a while, is a aluminum metal skirting. No venting within that. But like I said at the beginning, probably 85% of the manufactured homes that we're currently working on through various programs are that vented vinyl skirting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those tend to be the hardest to actually do with efficiency measures, at least that we tried
Yep.
To begin with.
Yep. And we can dive more into that if you want, Cam.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I've actually noticed being out of Colorado now is metal is more common, um, in a wetter climate than even the OSB. I think, part of that, like, moisture wicking from the ground, they wanna avoid that, obviously, and so metal and vinyl, of course, is still a pretty big deal, but I think part of that is regional, in terms of, like, vinyl's used because the ground can shift, so maybe if that wasn't as big of an issue, maybe the other 2 would be more common, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah,
understand.
another thing we see when you talk about like regional types of skirting and why certain things might be that way, depending on the climate zone. One of the big issues we see out here in Colorado with the vinyl skirting is in the wintertime, it gets pretty cold here a lot of the time. And when it's really cold outside, that vinyl skirting, it breaks so easily.
Yeah.
So we've actually ran into a lot of the time in the wintertime, the contractors are a lot less eager, should I say, to work on these manufactured home crawl space areas because they know as soon as they need to pop that skirting off to get underneath,
Yeah.
there's a really high chance that since it's so cold, it's going to snap that skirting apart. And now you have an unhappy homeowner, got to
Yeah.
deal with that whole process. So it speaks to what you're saying. Like there's definitely use cases dependent on climate zone for what material of skirting you would want. And unfortunately, the majority of the homes out here have that vinyl skirting, and it's a problem we've seen so many times. Like they go out, they need to pop the skirting out to get underneath, maybe to lay a moisture barrier or something like that, insulate the belly. They pop it off, it snaps in half. So
Yeah.
now the contractor's in this weird spot where they have to communicate with the homeowner, like, hey, sorry, we snapped this. We're gonna have to come back, replace the skirting. It adds more time, more labor, lost dollars there. So just speaks to it's far and away the least favorable to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, as we look towards solutions for some of these problems, I almost just feel like there needs to be a new kind of skirting invented that's able to move with shifting ground, but also does better in cold. Because
I wonder if like a fiberglass,
Oh,
like we have fiberglass entryway doors
Yeah.
and things like that.
yeah,
And that seems to be better just from, field experience, seems to be kind of a better more long-lasting product here. So
Yeah.
I wonder if like a fiberglass skirting would be something that would be valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be definitely an interesting thing. I actually don't know where all this skirting's coming from. I don't know what companies are producing this, but we need to get in contact with them.
Yes, we should.
And that's usually factory manufactured, correct? So it would be, reaching out to some large conglomerate that's mass producing these things. And good luck getting them
Yeah.
to try and change their overall product,
Yeah.
just because we don't like the way it works when we're trying to do retrofit work there. But I also think like maybe it's as easy as just having a foundation for all these manufactured homes. Obviously, that adds a lot more labor and cost into the process. But when you think about long term for longevity for these units, having an actual foundation where we could have a lot better material surrounding the
Yeah.
manufactured home and also prevent a lot of that movement because we have a legitimate foundation would definitely be ideal.
Yeah, for sure. And it wouldn't, one of the selling points or whatever that or, manufactured homes are technically a vehicle because they can move, but in reality, I was looking at a study the other day and it said once a manufactured home is in a place, 89% of them will never move again. And so it's like, yeah, might as well build up an actual kind of foundation around it. That would be a little
Well,
better.
and I think something on that same piece, right, on the financial side is, at least from my knowledge and my experience, when you have a manufactured home, unless it's on a foundation, it's not considered for loans,
Yeah.
right? It's not considered an actual house.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden now you have bigger issues getting a loan and things like that. So that can actually raise your entry level into getting into these kind of things too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you were able to build it in a way that if in the future you did need to replace the unit, you can do that. There's in the HUD codes it has anyway, it has a availability for that, but I guess we're not necessarily talking about that. We're talking about skirting. So
Right.
what are some of the problems that you might see with OSB skirting or metal? Because obviously there's a whole host with vinyl, but what about those other two?
I think what you were talking about earlier, right, is a big one is the heaval of the ground, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it pops the siding off, or
Mhm.
in the metal case, it can kink it. Because we do have some very expansive soils here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Another thing that comes to mind too, which you also touched on previously, Cam, is in these manufactured home parks, like grading and everything isn't particularly focused on as like a legitimate need. So
Yeah.
if you have like negative grading into an OSB foundation, we're gonna have that moisture wicking up that foundation, rotting it out, maybe causing mold if we don't have any kind of ventilation whatsoever down there.
Yeah.
So over time, if we do have like an underlying moisture issue, the OSB foundation is actually the last thing you want. So it's kind of like you have to take a all-encompassing viewpoint. Like if we're going to have that rigid material, what's the grading like? If it's not adequate, can we make it positive away from the home instead of negative into the foundation? So that's
Mhm.
definitely an issue we foresee.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. A lot of these bigger problems that kinda need some bigger solutions and everything. Um, what about, uh, what about different things we've noticed in general with parks, like, as a whole, park requirements maybe, or misconceptions about skirting and different types of skirting? What are some things, like, on a broader scale within those parks that maybe we've seen or noticed?
Well, one big thing which we've ran into quite a bit actually is, I guess you could call it the HOA of the manufactured home park.
Mm.
Anytime you start tampering with that skirting, a lot of times they don't want you to do that whatsoever. If there's any kind of change in the overall appearance there, they want an approval. They want to go through this whole process, and
Yeah.
actually it could turn into like, hey, we don't like the way this turned out, so we're going to fine the homeowner and force you to basically go back in time and replace the work that was initially done. So that has definitely been a barrier for us too, is like especially with the vinyl skirting, that's really where it comes into play. Like if it's not put perfectly back into place as it was beforehand, we could run into some issues with the management at the manufactured home park as well.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, they almost, I feel like sometimes would want you to put it back and then add those, weed whacker marks on the bottom of 'em. It needs to look like it did, so it needs to be completely broken on the bottom.
Exactly. And another thing is, a huge thing we noticed is most of the people living in these manufactured home parks, they think venting within the skirting is an absolute necessity, which we know from a building science perspective, that's not always necessarily the case. It's all dependent on, do we have an ability to put a moisture barrier down? Is there already some kind of built-in ventilation within the manufactured home itself? Or is it just as simple as taking a 10,000 foot view and saying, hey, we know these manufactured homes are going to be super leaky to begin with. So there's already kind of built in uncontrolled ventilation, which obviously isn't ideal, but it's providing enough airflow underneath the belly to where we don't need to worry about designated skirting within the actual vinyl skirting itself. So we had to do a lot of educating to the public at the manufactured home parks. Like, it's very situation oriented when you may or may not want to have ventilated skirting, because a lot of the times with the work that we're doing, putting a moisture barrier down, and if the skirting calls for it, if it's a really nice rigid material or metal, we can spray foam it potentially. Then we're not concerned with ventilation down there because we've almost conditioned it. So that's a big issue too, is educating the public on, you don't necessarily need this, and not to freak out after we've done this retrofit work and think like, oh, I have no ventilation down there, it's going to rot out my whole unit. That's not the case. So that's definitely another big barrier we've ran into as well.
Yeah. Yeah, let's
Yeah, and I
move.
think that brings up a point, Kim, with how you're looking at it, right? So I know we're talking about skirting, but if you can't put anything on the skirting, right, you can't actually condition that space, then having the ventilation in it may not be an issue. But you do have to remember that now you're doing the floor,
Mm,
right? So that you don't get frozen pipes and you don't get the leakage out of the ductwork that's just going into the vented, now extremely vented crawl space, if you will.
yeah.
And so, the skirting then just becomes a facade.
Yep.
Mhm.
And if you're putting in all this unnecessary ventilation down there, without doing the steps that Parker just said, with attacking the belly in the proper way, we can also have a situation where the manufactured home's so depressurized now, by adding a bunch of additional ventilation, you're increasing the amount of crawl space air that's getting sucked through the home, which obviously we don't want to happen for a whole myriad of indoor air quality reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. In that same building science direction, because I think understanding that science of how the even just energy will move will help us understand what solutions can be done. How could we've talked a little bit about them with venting and everything. How could insulation and changing the skirting maybe affect comfort, durability, and health and safety for one of these units? Changing it either in a direction of, towards vinyl, or removing it, or adding some, or adding insulation, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of, if it's an existing vinyl skirting, finding a contractor that's problem number one, finding a contractor that's comfortable with ripping that out and replacing it with a rigid material.
Yeah.
Because if we have a solid rigid material, now the possibilities have opened up much, much more in terms of what we can do. We could potentially put, continuous rigid insulation across that. We could potentially spray foam it if the conditions are right. So honestly, I would say there's probably never going to be a situation where we want to change the existing skirting to vinyl. It should always be the other way around. I
Mm,
think vinyl just proposes way too many problems. And if you're in a situation where you actually do think we need ventilation in that skirting, we can do built-in ventilation with a rigid material. It doesn't have to be vinyl. They have some really great ventilation units you can cut, a nice square with, stick it in there. Now we have a vent. You can do that on all four sides, as many as you would like, whatever's adequate for the volume of that crawl space. So I would always say, if it's possible within budget, contractor that can do it. we should get rid of that vinyl skirting and replace it with either a metal or a rigid material, because it's now opened up a whole different world of possibilities of stuff that we can actually complete in there. And just from a longevity standpoint, it's far, far better.
Yeah.
Well, you also have pests, right? So
Yes,
with
yes.
vinyl siding, it is essentially impossible to keep out
Yep.
rodents, potentially larger animals, raccoons, cats, whatever. And then if they decide that that's a great place to live, all of a sudden now that becomes an indoor air quality issue potentially, as well as just, having pests around your house is not what you want to do if you can help it.
Yeah, we've
Right?
had countless times where contractors have called us and said, hey, we got down here, we got dead mice, dead cats, dead raccoons. Now it turns into a potential, biohazard situation. And
Yeah.
if we have decaying animals down there, that's obviously going to translate into issues in the home. And also, like Parker was saying, it's just a gateway for all kinds of pests to come in and then up through that belly, tear up the sheathing and the belly insulation that we have in there, and potentially actually make your way into your home. Definitely not ideal.
Yeah.
Talking on the pest thing with, I think it becomes a bigger question than what you would use. If you are going to use rigid, it then becomes where you are in the country.
Yep.
Right? Are there, ants? Are there termites?
Yep.
What kind of potential there? Is there a lot of moisture? Right? So you might actually want to go with that metal, because termites can't get into metal, right? That doesn't do anything. And as long as you can still seal that so that mice and things can't get in, then that might be a really good option. And it's not going to necessarily wick that moisture up either.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on the region of the country that you're in, it's, I think, dependent on maybe what rigid you would like.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be good. And it's funny you kept going in the direction that I was like, man, I would kind of wonder this as I was thinking through the different things. Then I was thinking about pests and that kind of stuff. So, especially because something that's always the case in manufactured homes is the ducting's always down there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And something about the way that these are transported and then placed in their spots always leads the ducting to have some kind of leakage. I mean, like most of the units that we've looked at and seen have some kind of gap with the return, or not the return, with the supply and the register, and how there will be a weird gap around it, or just it'll be shifted in some way, or that crossover duct for double wide
Or
units.
disconnected entirely. We've seen that too.
Yeah.
Plenty of times.
Yeah, so really making sure we keep pests out and improve the health and safety of that under area, though from an outside perspective may not seem like that important. It's incredibly important because our ducks are down there.
Yep.
Yeah, and like I think we talked about this on the first episode of this series, is duct leakage and sealing the duct work is one of the cheapest and most impactful things we can do on these manufactured homes from an air leakage standpoint, comfortability, pests. Even if you got a disconnected supply boot, wow, okay, mice, anything can run right up through there. So that should always be a scope of work that's considered when you're thinking about what can we actually do with this manufactured home. It's cheap, it's easy to teach a contractor how to do properly, and it can be highly impactful.
And not to take us too far off topic here, but since we're talking about ducks just a little bit, the office, right? Our actual office is a manufactured house, right? And so when we got it, it was really gross, right? Mice everywhere. So all of these pest things become an issue. And the ductwork was so bad, we just, for science sake, we tried to have them cleaned and all that kind of stuff. And they were just so layered with mouse and stuff that we just didn't, we had to abandon them, right? We actually took them out and went to a ductless system because they were unsalvageable.
Right.
If the skirting itself, to bring it back around, if the skirting itself would have been done very well and wouldn't have the holes in it and all that kind of stuff, then it potentially could have kept those pests out, and then you wouldn't have that ducting problem.
Right. So yeah, good. Let's now narrow it down. And we've talked a little bit about some of these solutions and changing skirting and what situations that would look like. Let's first give best case scenario. So we have good budget and we don't have to worry about the ground shifting or whatever it may be. What's our best case scenario with the skirting and installation on the skirting?
Yeah, I think best case scenario when you take all factors in, climate zone, moisture, temperature differentials, is probably a metal skirting with a flat surface. So that's key too when we talk about like if we want spray foam to adhere adequately, we want a flat, not a wavy surface like the vinyl is most of the time. And I've even seen it with the aluminum skirting too.
Mhm.
So if we can get a flat, smooth metal skirting for our climate zone, I think that would be optimal. That would allow us to successfully adhere spray foam to it and have it have the adequate longevity there.
And the radon barrier too.
Exactly. It would also
The
enable
moisture
us
barrier.
to fully encapsulate that crawl space with a moisture barrier. And if we can't achieve that, I would probably say second best is definitely a rigid material, like a thick OSB like material, because in Colorado it is a pretty dry climate. So as long as we have the grading situated properly and everything like that, moisture shouldn't be a huge issue. So with the OSB rigid skirting, we could do. I would probably start with a continuous insulation there. We could do spray foam. That's an option, absolutely. But I would say it might work best with a continuous insulation on the OSB skirting. But top line situation would be a flat surface with an aluminum, metal material like skirting that would allow us to encapsulate, spray foam it, and do the full scope of work that we would hope to be able to do.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, so I like that. With the metal is good for durability, health and safety, efficiency, all that kind of above if we're doing the right stuff to it and we can. What is a situation, and again, we've maybe already addressed a little bit of this. What's a situation where we just have to hands off and do a bare minimum, and then what would the bare minimum for that skirting look like?
Yeah, good question. I think that's kind of what we run into a lot of the time here, unfortunately. The bare minimum, when we're out with this vinyl vented skirting that might not be in the best condition, grading's poor on the property, the bare minimum, what we've been able to do is what we call a burrito wrapped insulation. So essentially, we're taking a plastic wrapped fiberglass bat material and we're wrapping that and mechanically fastening it to the top and bottom of the vinyl skirting across the entire perimeter of that crawl space. So that allows us to at least have a little bit of an added R value where we might not have thought it was possible before. That's kind of the bare minimum of what we can do here. Now, granted, sometimes the skirting is just in such a poor condition. It's beat up, it's torn up, broken in a lot of places. Sometimes we kind of just have to say, hey, sorry, if we can't get this yanked out and replaced, we might not be able to do anything down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you then go to the underbelly,
Yep.
right? Specifically, and I think the underbelly is really important anyway.
Yes.
Right.
Right?
Both and if we can.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we want to actually do the whole thing. So yeah, I think the underbelly would be the next kind of piece. And I think just to say about the burrito itself, right, is, in my opinion here, it's good for like one thing.
Yep.
Right. And that is slowing the heat loss and airflow. Like technically, I guess two things, but to me, that's like one system.
Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
And what that does in truth is just help give the pipes down there that are probably exposed in some form or fashion a little bit more time to not freeze.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So, or every once in a while you see someone has to have like a heater underneath because they've had frozen pipes, right? This actual wrap or burrito helps like that heater actually do its job.
Yeah.
right? Or the pipe wrap or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's a small help, but very small, I think.
Yeah.
So it does help with future kind of costs. That's my biggest take on it.
Yep.
Is that if someone has to then go and replace their plumbing, right? That's a big expense. And if this burrito can help them not have to ever do that, I think that's a wonderful addition.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, like we said, this is like, we've, you know, all the other options are kind of off the table, so it's that bare minimum of like, well, we can do something, we have some budget. It's like we have to try to help, in whatever way we can in that case.
Exactly. And
Um,
it's very low cost, and it's very easy to train a contractor to do that type of insulation. So, it's that last case resort, but at least it's something we can provide at a low cost to the homeowner, and it's something that we know it's very trainable to do. So we have confidence in the contractors that are doing it, that it's done adequately.
yeah, and that's actually something we'll talk a little bit more. eh, I was kind of wondering how much time we'd have to talk about the contractors in this episode, but we'll have to talk about that a little bit more of like, do we upscale contractors we already know? Do we need to find new ones and that kind of stuff and what that looks like? So we'll definitely address that topic more in the future. But I suppose let's end on just this question. What is something that homeowners can do, or like really small, like, um, healthy housing weatherization programs, maybe even in a short amount of time, you only got 30 minutes in the year or something like that. What are something homeowners or those types of programs could do now to help with that skirting and that basic underlayer? That you could just do DIY.
Yeah,
Probably replacing the broken pieces, right?
that is
Making
definitely
sure
like,
it's a solid surface.
I know where we're at in Colorado. There's a couple of manufactured housing part stores where you can buy individual panels of skirting. They'll even cut it to size for you if you really wanted like a long piece, short piece. They can customize it for you.
Yeah.
That's something you could definitely do. That vinyl skirtings just slip in place. It's really easy to maneuver. I would just recommend doing it not in the wintertime. Do it in the summertime, springtime, when it's a little bit warmer out there. That's something they can absolutely do. If you have 2 or 3 broken or damaged panels, really affordable too. You could go down to one of those parts stores, pick up a few panels, replace that on your own. Now you're good. And they also have options for vented and not vented vinyl skirting. So if you wanted a little bit of extra ventilation, pick up a vented piece of skirting. Another thing you could do, it doesn't tie into skirting, but that underbelly piece is, everyone can go to Home Depot and pick up some pipe wrap. So
Yeah.
if your belly's in poor condition and you can see uninsulated water lines underneath there, pick up a few feet of pipe wrap at Home Depot and just slap that on there. That'll help with frozen pipes, that type of issue. But yeah, I think those are probably the 2 main things you could do, is replace the damaged skirting itself. And then if you have a really poor underbelly, finding some pipe wrap insulation to slap on those exposed pipes.
Well, we've seen on an underbelly too, where they do like a 2x4 sheet of 2-inch, extruded polyiso or whatever.
Yep.
Not polyiso, but polystyrene. And then now their pipes are in between that insulation and the heated floor,
Yeah.
right? So now it's on the right side of that. And that can be something that's pretty easy for a homeowner to do, as long as they can get under there, with the materials and things like that. But you just screw that into the actual wood.
Yep.
Don't screw it into the pipes, of course.
Yeah.
But then that's a kind of an inexpensive and a good thing to do if you do have one of those big holes or something in the the underbelly. So
That's good. Yeah, I like it. Some good just right away stuff that can be applied for both building assessors, contractors, homeowners, all of the above. And that's something that we want to do and strive to do. And if this topic is interesting to you, or you find it really useful or helpful, we do have a lot more like applicable right away details in our manufactured housing course, where we go over even stuff like what to do about a water main, because they're usually down there, or a water meter. What are we going to do with skirting for that? Or, what about stuff that's stored under that area? So all of these kind of things. You'll find a lot more information in our manufactured housing course. So definitely check that out on our website, blueskytraining.com, if that's something that interests you. As always, thank you all for joining me and talking about this topic. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.